Hi everyone, in this presentation we'll be profiling Japan to support Australian firms considering international expansion. We'll cover the impact of globalization on Japan's political economy, examine its economic and human development, assess cultural differences with Australia, and explore relevant trade theories and current trade policies. Let's begin with the first question. Question 1. Globalization refers to the accelerated expansion and intensification of interconnectedness and interdependence among national economies, cultures, markets, and societies on a global scale. This phenomenon is largely driven by advancements in technology, cross-border trade, and an increased mobility of capital and labor. From an economic standpoint, globalization comprises two key dimensions. The globalization of markets involves the gradual integration of previously distinct national markets into a unified global marketplace. Meanwhile, the globalization of production enables firms to geographically disperse different stages of their value chain, selecting locations based on comparative advantages such as lower labor costs, superior quality, or specialized skill sets. As one of the world's largest economies, Japan has actively embraced these forces. It has embedded itself within global markets through a strong emphasis on export-led growth, foreign direct investment, also known as FDI, and participation in international production networks. The liberalization of trade and rapid technological process enabled Japanese multinationals such as Toyota and Sony to expand their global footprints, profoundly reshaping Japan's economic structure. By diversifying beyond traditional sectors and positioning itself within global value chains, Japan has enhanced its economic resilience and capacity for sustainable long-term growth. A nation's political economy refers to the interdependent relationship between its political, economic, and legal systems, which collectively shape the national environment for business activity and influence its attractiveness to foreign investors. These systems not only determine how economic resources are allocated and laws are enforced, but also define the broader institutional context within which these firms operate. Japan functions as a representative democracy within a constitutional monarchy. This system, the emperor holds a symbolic ceremonial role, while political power is vested in elected officials, most notably the Prime Minister and Cabinet. A democracy is broadly defined as a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. A representative democracy, more specifically, allows citizens to elect individuals who make decisions and create laws on their behalf. In Japan, these representatives form part of a bicameral legislature, known as the National Diet, which comprises the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. The Prime Minister is selected among these elected members, further reinforcing democratic accountability. Japan's political systems is complemented by a well-established and independent legal system, contributing to political stability and regulatory predictability. Culturally, Japan embodies a hybrid of individualism and collectivism. Collectivism, defined as a prioritization of global goals and harmony over individual interests and achievements, is historically rooted in Japanese society, promoting harmony, consensus, and cooperation. Whilst Japan exhibits a predominantly collectivist society, it coexists with individualistic values in its private sector, such as entrepreneurial freedom and market competition. Simultaneously, the state retains a guiding role in economic planning in certain strategic industries, reflecting Japan's coordinated approach to capitalism. To fully grasp Japan's globalization trajectory, it is essential to revisit the country's so-called lost decade, a period of prolonged economic stagnation during the 1990s following the collapse of an asset price bubble in real estate and equities. The crisis has ushered a sustained era of deflation, a banking sector meltdown, and an extremely weak economic growth, with Japan's average annual GDP growth plunging to just 0.5%, a sharp decline from the average 4% in the 1980s. In this context, globalization was merely not a trend that Japan adopted. It became a strategic necessity for national recovery and global reintegration. The economic downturn exposed the limitations of Japan's insular economic model, prompting both the government and private sector to embrace market liberalization, financial restructuring, and a greater openness to international trade and investment. Japan responded by intensifying its reliance on export-led growth, foreign investment, and in corporate governance reform, all by which are heavily shaped by the external global pressures. Key policies responses included the deregulation of strategic industries, such as banking and telecommunications, the liberalization of capital markets, and a suite of corporate reforms aimed at improving transparency and competitiveness. Japan's deeper integration into the global economy is evident through its active participation in multilateral trade agreements such as WTO, TPP, and RCEP. These frameworks have reduced trade barriers, opened domestic markets, and supported export growth in critical sectors like automobiles, electronics, and semiconductors. Companies like Toyota and Sony exemplify the shift. Toyota's global production model sources parts internationally, assembling in Japan and distributing globally, demonstrates the globalization of production, while Sony disperses supply chains, reinforced Japan's role in international value networks. Faced with global competition and sluggish domestic growth, Japan significantly increased investment in research and development, particularly in robotics, AI, and pharmaceuticals. Today, it ranks among the world's top R&D spenders, reflecting what held at 1999 called the deepening of globalization, not just trade expansion, but a transformation in innovation and competitiveness. Globalization has also intersected with Japan's demographic challenges. The introduction of specified skilled worker visa in 2019 marked a cautious but meaningful step towards labor integration in response to an aging population and workforce shortages, particularly in sectors like aged care, manufacturing, and IT. Culturally, globalization has created a reciprocal exchange. Western trends and influence Japanese consumer behaviors, while Japan's cultural exports, anime, cuisine, and design continue to shape global pop culture. These shifts underscore how globalization has redefined Japan's economy, society, and place in the world. Japan's civil law system poses several challenges for Australian firms, particularly due to the contrast with Australia's common law framework. In Japan, laws are highly codified and detailed, and judges apply these laws with limited interpretive discretion. Consequently, contracts tend to be shorter and less explicit, as many terms are presumed to be covered by the civil code. This stands in stark contrast to the Australian legal practice, where contracts must explicitly outline all terms to ensure enforceability. These differences can create complications in contract law and dispute resolution. In Japan, disputes are seldom taken to court, as a legal culture favors negotiation and informal resolution mechanisms, such as mediation or arbitration, over litigation. These preferences may present challenges for Australian firms accustomed to a more formally legal, enforceable contract environment. Intellectual property, or IP protection, is another key concern. While Japan maintains strong legal frameworks for IP, enforcement can be slow and procedural. Therefore, Australian firms should be proactively registering trademarks, patents, and copyright with the Japan Patent Office, rather than relying solely on international treaties such as TRIPS. For example, an Australian fashion brand entering into the Japanese market must secure a local IP registration to avoid infringement risks, even if protections exist under Australian law. Japan also enforces strict labor protections, particularly for long-term employees. These include rigid dismissal procedures, strong employment security norms, and active involvement in labor unions in court and redundancy matters. For Australian businesses, this means higher legal risk and less flexibility in employment decisions, as well as an expectation of long-term employee-employer relationships. Additionally, product liability laws in Japan are stringent. Firms can be held accountable under both civil and criminal law if a product becomes harmful, regardless of intent. All important products must adhere to national safety standards, which typically involve rigorous technical testing and certification. Failure to comply can lead to significant legal consequences, including fines, product recalls, or reputational damage. In sum, while Japan offers a stable and well-regulated legal environment, its civil law orientation, labor rigidity, IP procedures, and stringent product liability standards necessitate careful planning and adaptation for Australian firms considering market entry.
Hi, so I'm going to present on question 2. So there will be 3 components of question 2. First, we will look at the economic development of Japan. Second, I will explain its human development of Japan. Finally, I will analyze which of the 2 is more important for Australian firm. First is economic development. As we can see, Japan is a high-income country with a GDP per capita of $33.8 thousand in 2023. Its PPP adjusted GNI is even higher at $52.8 thousand, reflecting a strong consumer purchasing power. This is beneficial for Australian firms targeting a high-value consumer. However, Japan's GDP growth rate is only 1.68%, which indicated economic maturity and a slow pace of expansion. While income is high, the economy is growing slowly. The Japanese economy is led by service sector, contributing nearly 70% of GDP, followed by manufacturing and electronic. This sector align well with Australian export and expertise. In addition, a strong trade relationship in energy and agriculture lower entry barriers for Australian business. Although its wealth, Japan faced major demographic challenges. Nearly 29% of population is aged 65 and above, which is one of the highest proportion globally. The labor force participation rate is 62.4%, and the dependency ratio are rising. For Australian business, this suggests a limit long-term market growth and rise in the operational costs due to labor shortages. It could also impact the productivity and increase the need for automation. Now let's look at Japan's human development. Japan's Human Development Index in 2023 is 0.9, ranking 19th globally. Life expectancy is around 84 years, and the average education level is 13.4 years, with nearly 100% literacy. This reflects a highly skilled, educated, and healthy population, ideal for firms seeking quality over quantity. Japan also has a low unemployment rate of 2.6%, showing a stable and a productive labor market. For Australian company, this means Japan offer a reliable business environment, and efficient and skilled workforce, consumer who value ethic, innovation, and product quality. For example, business in premium consumer goods, education, or sustainable industry are likely to succeed in such an environment. A strong human development foundation reduces risk and help firms pursue long-term innovation-driven strategies. So now we look at both economic and human development. Which one matters more to Australian firms? While Japan economy is strong in terms of income and purchasing power, but it also slow growing and face long-term issues like population, aging, and labor decline. On the other hand, Japan's human development is exceptional. Its people are educated, healthy, and society is stable and safe. This factor lead a skilled workforce, loyal consumer, and a low-risk operating environment. Although GNI and GDP levels are important, they don't always guarantee business success. Without strong human development, economic wealth might not translate into productivity, innovation, or business sustainability. So for Australian companies entering the Japanese market, we believe human development is more important. It offers a deeper, more sustainable advantages such as a better labor quality, consumer sophistication, and social stability. This directly impact productivity, innovation, and investment risk. So it's not just about a current income, it's about a long-term quality, adaptability, and stability. In short, human development gives us a clear picture of market depth and a strategic sustainability, not just a short-term profit. That's all for question 2.
Is the Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory. Firstly, power distance focuses on the degree to which power is distributed fairly from the perspective of the less powerful individuals of the community. Japan sits at a score of 54, demonstrating their care for social hierarchy, but not at an exceedingly great level. On the other hand, Australia sits at a lower 38, representing a more informal, participative culture. Uncertainty avoidance addresses how unsure individuals feel about uncertain things in their society. Japan is at a high of 92 as they are often impacted by natural disasters and their people are constantly preparing for the unexpected. Australia sits at 51, demonstrating their intermediate rating of uncertainty but security. Using the Minkoff-Hofstede model of culture, individualism collectivism was at 62 in Japan, and the flexibility monumentalism at 234. Australia opposingly had scores of 73 and 41, representing their significant differences in more individual and flexible cultures. Although they are both individual societies, Japan have a loyal and private culture with a family priority, whereas Australia focuses more on personal rights and freedoms. Masculinity femininity shows the disparity of a culture that preferences material rewards and achievement in comparison to modesty and quality of life. Japan has a score of 95, reflecting their decisiveness and competition represented in their culture. This shows more masculine culture as they focused on their normal, long, hard-working hours and difficulty for women to find success in their country. Similarly, Australia is at 61, which is still a masculine and decisive society, however, just not ranked as highly as Japan. The objective for most Australians is striving to be the best they can be, however, it is more shared values than the competitive Japanese culture. Both Australia and Japan have long-term orientation, with Japan at 100 and Australia at 56. Japan sees life as a short moment, so doing your best to invest and work towards a future is a high priority. Australia is also pragmatic, however, it is very much dependent on the situation and time. Lastly, indulgence restraint is a 42 for Japan and a 71 for Australia. Japan is more of a restraint culture as they don't have as much leisure and personal time to indulge themselves, whereas Australia have more of a willingness to reward themselves by having fun and living through enjoyment. Overall, Japan and Australia share some modern similarities. However, they are more focused on the structural aspects and the long term, whilst Australia addresses more individual rights and the enjoyment of life. Ronan and Shankar's cultural clusters theory identifies countries that share cultural similarities. V&M 2008 state the convergence theory can be applied within a country cluster or segment, whereas the divergence theory should be adopted between two clusters or segments. Within the same country cluster, this will result, for instance, in similar types of relationships. Ronan and Shankar 1985 classified Australia under the Anglo cultures, whilst Japan was classified under the Confucian Asian cluster. Research discovered that the Meta-Western region, which includes the Anglo cluster, and the Meta-Eastern region with the Confucian cluster were noticeably different. Anglo showed more performance-based cultures but were weak in their collectivism. Japan in Confucian Asia was characterized by collectivism, high power distance, and group unity, whilst Australia and Anglo clusters were more individualized, with a lower power distance and more personal equality. Ultimately, the Hofstede focused on the differentials between Japan and Australia quantitatively in their values and cultures, whilst Ronan and Shankar focused more on the contextual pairing of different clusters and grouping these cultures. Japan and Australia have many similarities, such as being in the World Trade Organization, the WTO. However, their cultures remain extremely distinct. Globalization has allowed more exposure through the countries, especially through younger generations, due to social medias, technology, fashion, and consumption patterns. Australia has embraced a lot of Japanese foods and cultural practices without altering their core values. Both countries operate under democratic political systems. However, Japan uses civil law practices influenced by Europeans, whilst Australia follows common law systems like Britain. Japan is more focused on hierarchy and formal process, whereas Australia is individualized with open debates. Overall, even though there has been some drastic process in taking some cultural practices and understanding each other, there is still a significant difference between them. There are many different values, social expectations, and communication differences. Although there have been changes, it is focused on coexisting and using each other for mutual benefit. Ultimately, both cultures are becoming more similar due to alignments and globalization, even though both Japan and Australia are very different in many ways.
4. Adam Smith introduced and promoted the theory of absolute advantage in his 1776 novel, The Wealth of Nations, where he proposed a new trade theory to go against the mercantilist system of trade. Absolute advantage refers to a system of trade where a country is more efficient than any other country in producing a product. Smith explains that such countries should specialize in the production of these goods, and then trade such goods for the goods produced by other countries. Smith further emphasizes that a country should only produce goods where it is more efficient, and trade for the goods where it is not efficient. He also emphasizes that government should provide support to these industries that maintain an absolute advantage through subsidies or tariffs. David Ricardo offered a new theory of trade in 1817 in his book, The Principles of the Political Economy and Taxation. Building on the work by Smith in 1776, Ricardo introduced comparative advantage. Comparative advantage refers to the idea that countries should specialize in the production of those goods they produce most efficiently and buy goods that they produce less efficiently from other countries, even if this means buying goods from other countries that they could produce more efficiently at home. Ricardo emphasizes that government should introduce public policy as a means to support industries with a comparative advantage. Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage and Smith's theory of absolute advantage both support the idea of free and unrestricted trade and that trade is a positive-sum game. Following Smith's theory of absolute advantage, Japan should specialize in industries where they are more efficient and productive than other countries. As such, under the theory of absolute advantage, Japan should focus on the automotive manufacturing industry, the high-tech electronics industry, and the advanced robotics and automation industry. As a result of Japan's highly skilled workforce and increasingly high levels of research and development, they are globally renowned for being more productive, efficient, and innovative compared to the rest of the world in these specific industries. And as such, they should focus on producing and exporting from these industries and importing goods from other industries in different countries that they have an absolute advantage. Although, following Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, Japan should attempt to specialize in industries where they sacrifice the least, in terms of alternative output, even if that means giving up an industry where they are more efficient at producing than other countries. Under Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, Japan should focus on the high-tech electronics and semiconductor industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the green technology and renewable energy industry. As previously mentioned, Japan is highly renowned for its highly skilled workforce and its research and development capabilities, which allows them to innovate and produce high-quality products, especially in the electronics and semiconductor industry and the green technology and renewable energy industry, providing them with a comparative advantage in both sectors. Further, Japan's investment in research and their aging population drives innovation in healthcare and biotech, providing them with the means to maintain a comparative advantage in the pharmaceutical industry. Under comparative advantage, Japan should focus their production capacities in these industries and should import goods internationally from other industries where they don't have a comparative advantage. All in all, we believe that Japan should follow David Ricardo's comparative advantage trade theory. While Adam Smith's theory of absolute advantage provides a means for domestic production and successful trade, it is ultimately outdated and flawed, while Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage reflects modern global trade dynamics where even less dominant players can benefit from specialization in our complex global economy. Japan already imports labor-intensive goods and raw materials while exporting high-value, innovation-driven products. This aligns with Ricardo's principle of specializing in goods that offer the greatest relative efficiency. Furthermore, Ricardo's theory benefits Japan as their demographic challenges make them less competitive in labor-intensive industries. Comparative advantage allows Japan to focus on capital and knowledge-intensive sectors where it can thrive despite workforce constraints. Finally, Ricardo's theory promotes trade even between nations with uneven productivity levels, encouraging economic cooperation and development, which supports the modern theory of globalization that the world relies heavily on.
Hi, my name is Kia and I'm doing question 5. So some of the trade policy instruments that Japan has been implying is the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, export controls on high-tech goods like semiconductors, subsidized for strategic industry like shipbuilding, currency management to support export competitiveness like automobiles, and participation in regional and global trade agreements like the FTA or the GATT. So as you can see in the table here, since the early 2000s, Japan has been actively pushing forward with free trade agreement negotiations, especially with countries in the ASEAN region. So far, Japan has signed 11 FTAs, 10 of them are one-to-one deals with countries like Singapore, and one is regional agreement with all of ASEAN. These FTAs are special agreements between selected countries to reduce or remove trade barriers like tariffs and non-tariff barriers. In the 1970s and 1980s, Japan transitioned from exporting textiles and steel to focus on high-tech products like automobiles and electronics. By the early 1980s, its shares of global high-tech export had grown significantly, intensifying competition and leading to trade tensions, particularly with the United States and Europe. To address this concern and demonstrate a commitment to fair trade, Japan proactively reduced its tariff rates ahead of schedule during the Tokyo Road of GATT in 1979, resulting in some of the world's lowest average tariffs, while certain quotas remain on products like beef and agricultural goods. Japan's overall effort to lower trade barriers signified a strong move toward global trade cooperation. Japan's selective liberalization strategy is evident in the tariff policies too. For example, Japan eliminated tariffs on motor vehicles and auto parts, sector where it holds a global competitive advantage. Conversely, it maintained moderate tariffs on products like fiber optic cables and semiconductors to protect and foster domestic innovation. This approach demonstrates Japan's strategic use of tariffs to balance international competitiveness with the development of key domestic industry. So as you can see in the table here, motor vehicle zero parts are zero, and the other stay moderately. For the currency management, in the early 1980s, the depreciation of the yen against the US dollar significantly enhanced Japan's export competitiveness. This currency shift led to substantial profit increase for Japanese exporters, notably in the automobile sector, where export prices in yen rose by over 20% for large passenger cars and 10% for small cars. Similar trends were observed in steel and consumer electronics. While domestic prices remained stable, the favorable exchange rate amplified export profitability. This increased revenues bolstered corporate savings, which were subsequently reinvested into business, reinforcing Japan's export-driven growth strategy. This approach to managing the yen's value, though not explicitly termed currency manipulation, served as a strategic policy to strengthen Japan's position in global trade. In the 1972 paper, Kiyoshi Kojima, sorry if I read the name wrong, emphasized the role of export subsidization in Japan's trade policy, highlighting measures such as export tax incentive, interest rate reductions, and long-term export credits. These initiatives aim to enhance the competitiveness of Japan's export. For instance, the government provides low-interest loans through institutions like the Japan Export-Import Bank, exclusively for export activities, thereby serving as a clear form of export subsidization. Additionally, in the shipbuilding sector, the government subsidized a portion of the interest costs on loans for ship constructions, effectively reducing the financial burden on shipbuilders. This strategy illustrates how Japan employed export subsidization to support its export sectors and influence trade dynamics. So Japan's trade policy instruments reflect a blend of classical and modern international trade theories, including comparative advantage, Porter Diamond model of comparative advantage, new trade theory like strategic trade theory. So for the comparative advantage, means like even if one country is better at making everything, it still benefits from trading if it's focused on what it's relatively best at. In this case, Japan trade policy reflects a strategic application of comparative advantage by focusing on sectors where it holds relatively efficiency. Due to its scarcity of natural resources, Japan imports primary goods and concentrates on high-tech export like electronics and automobiles. This approach aligns with the classical theory of comparative advantage since emphasizing specialization is the area of Japan's efficiency. Between the 1975 and 1983, Japan's shares of manufactured goods from developing countries increased less than in other nations, indicating a deliberate shift toward technological advanced production rather than reliance on inexpensive imports. This evolution underscores Japan's commitment into innovation-driven comparative advantage, prioritizing technological sophistication over low-cost labor or raw materials. For the strategic trade policy, means that in certain industries, government can improve a country's economic position by supporting domestic companies, especially in industries where there are only a few global competitors. In this case, the Japanese government actively supports high technological sectors through measures like public procurement and administrative guidance, favoring domestic firms in global markets, such as supporting enable industry like automobiles, steel, and electronics to achieve increasing return to scale. Additionally, rising export prices led to a higher corporate profit, which were reinvested into business, reinforcing Japan's export-driven growth and global competitiveness. For the Porter Diamonds of national advantage, means to explain why some countries are better at certain industries than others and how they gain comparative advantage to the international trade. So the Japan global competitiveness align with Porter Diamonds because identify four key factors: factor conditions, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. Japan's significant investment in advanced factor conditions such as infrastructure, research, and education has enhanced its industrial capabilities. The government public procurement practice favoring domestic firms like Nippon Telegraphy and Telephone Corporation (NTT) have cultivated strong home demand and encouraged innovation. Additionally, Japan's interconnected industry, particularly in technology and manufacture, have fostered a robust industrial ecosystem. The intense domestic competition among Japanese firms has driven continuous improvement and innovation, solidifying Japan's position in global markets. And here is our reference list. This is the first one. This is the second one. And this is the third one. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I hope you have a good day. Thank you.